If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first became friends with Liam, that the person who would eventually upend my entire world was his father, I would have laughed. Not just a small chuckle, but a full-blown, tear-streaming laugh at the sheer absurdity. Marcus was a fixture, a piece of background scenery in the story of my friendship with his son. He was the quiet man in the garage, the gruff voice on the phone, the imposing figure who gave me a curt nod and nothing more. He was a mountain, immovable and distant, and I was just a guy who lived in his shadow, perfectly content in my own quiet, ordered life. My life was a carefully curated collection of routines. Wake up, coffee, work. I was a freelance graphic designer, which was a socially acceptable way of saying I spent most of my time alone in my small, meticulously clean apartment. My clients were pixels on a screen, their feedback delivered in neat, impersonal emails. My social life consisted of Liam, and that was enough. It was safe. My world was a fortress built of solitude, and I was its king, its sole inhabitant, its prisoner. Marcus was the antithesis of my world. He built things with his hands, real things. Decks, extensions, cabinets. His world was sawdust and sweat and the scent of cut pine. He was physically present in a way that always made me feel like a ghost. Broad shoulders, hands that looked like they could crush stone, a quiet confidence that radiated from him like heat from asphalt. In my mind, he was carved from a different, harder material than me. I saw him mostly on holidays or when I'd pick Liam up. He'd be there, a silent monolith, observing. His eyes, a startlingly clear gray, would pass over me without lingering. No words, no curiosity, just acknowledgement. Liam's friend, the artsy one, the quiet one. I was a known quantity, filed away and forgotten. And for years, that was the entirety of our relationship. A nod, a grunt, a chasm of unspoken things between us that I had no desire to cross. He was Liam's dad. He was, I assumed, immovably straight. He was a locked door I never even thought to approach. The first stone that loosened the foundation of my fortress was a phone call. Liam. His voice was tinny, strained with that specific brand of anxiety he got when he was trying to manage his father. Leo, man, I need a huge favor. A massive 1 inch, I was in the middle of a branding project, surrounded by color swatches and font pairings. My world in perfect order. Anything, that it's about my dad, my stomach did a slow, nervous flip. A conversation about Marcus was rare. Liam usually complained about his stubbornness in the abstract. He had that minor surgery on his shoulder. Remember? Rotator cuff, I remembered. A brief mention a few weeks back. Marcus had brushed it off, of course. Just a tweak. Well, he's not supposed to be lifting anything over 10 pounds. Doctor's orders. But you know him. He's going crazy not being able to work, so he's insisting on going to the gym. Says he'll just do legs or something. But he's a liar, Leo. He's going to try to bench press. I know it. I could picture it perfectly. Marcus ignoring pain, ignoring logic, driven by some internal engine of restless energy. I'm leaving for that Seattle conference tomorrow. Liam continued, his voice pleading. I'll be gone for 3 weeks. I can't leave him. He won't listen to me. He'll go alone and tear it right open again. A cold dread began to seep into my chest. I knew where this was going. He needs a spotter, Liam said, the words landing like stones. Someone to just be there, to make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. He respects you. That was the part that made me almost choke. He does not. He barely knows I exist. No, he does, Liam insisted. He thinks you're sensible. It was the most damning compliment I had ever received. It meant I was boring, predictable, safe, the perfect person to babysit a grown man. Liam, I can't. I don't do gyms. The words felt inadequate. The truth was, the idea of being in that space, a space of pure physicality, with him was terrifying. It was like asking a librarian to go skydiving. Please, Leo, just a few times a week. After his physical therapy. He agreed, surprisingly. Said if it would shut me up, he'd do it. He even suggested you. That was the detail that truly stunned me. He had suggested me. Marcus. Why? To have a quiet, unobtrusive shadow follow him around? Someone who wouldn't talk his ear off? It was the only explanation that made sense. My carefully constructed routine crumbled before my eyes. My quiet evenings of sketching and reading, replaced by the clang of weights and the smell of sweat. Replaced by him. Okay, I heard myself say, the word of betrayal to every instinct screaming at me to say no. Okay, I'll do it. The fortress had been breached. Not by force, but by a simple, desperate request. And I was the one who had lowered the drawbridge. The first day was an exercise in pure, unadulterated awkwardness. I wore the only athletic-ish clothes I owned, a pair of gray sweatpants and an old university t-shirt. I felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up. The gym was exactly as I'd imagined. Loud, bright, a symphony of grunts and clanging metal. It smelled of rubber and disinfectant and something else, something primal and alive. It was Marcus's world. I was just a tourist. He was already there, stretching by the weight racks. He moved with a stiff, deliberate grace, favoring his right shoulder. He saw me and gave his signature nod. No might, just that quiet acknowledgement. Leo, Marcus, a complete conversation. We were off to a roaring start. I followed him like a lost duckling, hovering uselessly while he used the leg press machine. My job, apparently, was to exist, to be the sensible presence Liam had outsourced. But being forced into this proximity, I started to notice things. Details that were impossible to see from across a lawn or a living room. I saw the fine web of silver threads in his dark hair, concentrated at his temples. I saw the deep lines etched around his eyes, not from anger, but from years of squinting into the sun on job sites. He moved to a seated row machine, and as he pulled the handle back, the muscles in his back and shoulders bunched and released under his worn gray shirt. I watched the play of sinew and bone, the sheer mechanics of him. It was mesmerizing. He was a machine built for work. And then I saw the flicker of pain. A tiny, almost imperceptible wince as he extended his arm. He tried to hide it instantly, his jaw tightening, but I saw it. The monument had a crack in it. He wasn't made of stone. He was made of the same fragile stuff as everyone else. He finished his set and rolled his good shoulder, his breath hissing out between his teeth. The frustration was a palpable cloud around him. He hated this weakness, hated being limited. Then came a moment I was dreading. The bench press. He slid onto the bench, the vinyl squeaking under his weight. The bar was empty, a laughable weight for a man of his size. He insisted on adding a small plate to each side. It was still nothing, but it was an act of defiance. Just stand here, he grunted, gesturing with his head. I stood behind him, my hands hovering uselessly in the air. I felt like a fool. What was I supposed to do? He pushed the weight up. Once. Twice. His form was perfect, controlled. On the fifth rep, his breath hitched. The bar slowed, then stopped its ascent. It wavered precariously over his chest. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. My thoughts didn't form. My body just moved. My hands closed over the cold, knurled steel of the bar. At the same instant, his own hands adjusted their grip, and our fingers collided. A mess of knuckles and skin. His hand was rough, calloused, and radiated a startling heat that seemed to travel straight up my arm and detonate in my chest. A frantic trap bird. That was my heart. I helped him guide the bar back onto the rack. It settled with a loud clank that echoed the sudden, jarring silence between us. I snatched my hands back as if the metal were white-hot. Sorry, I mumbled, my voice sounding foreign and high-pitched. He sat up slowly, rubbing his shoulder. He didn't look at me. Good. That's what you're here for. It wasn't a thank you. It was a statement of fact, a reinforcement of my role. But as he stood up, his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. And there was something there, not a flicker, more like a brief, shuttered glimpse into a lit room. Confusion, annoyance, something else I couldn't name. Then it was gone. The door slammed shut. He just nodded toward the door. Done for today. The walk to the parking lot was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was heavy, a physical weight. I was intensely aware of the space between us, a space that now felt charged and dangerous. My skin still hummed where we had touched. This continued for another week. 2 more sessions of stilted silence and my awkward hovering. Each time, I was more and more aware of him. The way he'd bite the inside of his cheek when a movement caused a spark of pain. The sheer, solid presence of him. I learned the landscape of his body from a distance. The corded muscles of his forearms, the thick column of his neck, the way he moved. I learned his habits. He always used the same locker. He always drank water from a battered metal canteen. He never made eye contact in the mirrors. I was becoming a scholar of Marcus, an expert in a subject I was not supposed to be studying. And the more I observed, the more the stone monument crumbled, replaced by a man who was weary and frustrated and achingly human. The shift happened on a Tuesday. It was raining, a steady, miserable drizzle that plastered the leaves to the pavement. The gym was mostly empty. After his main workout, he was attempting to do a series of stretches his physical therapist had prescribed. He was trying to use a resistance band to gently pull his arm across his body, but his angle was wrong. He grunted in frustration, his whole body tense. "You're fighting it," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. He froze, then turned his head to look at me. His gray eyes were stormy. What? My courage almost failed me. Who was I to tell this man how to move his own body? But I had sprained my wrist badly a few years ago, a stupid fall on some ice, and had endured months of physical therapy. I remembered the therapist's voice, her endless patience. I took a hesitant step forward. "You're pulling with your whole back. You're supposed to isolate the shoulder. Let the band do the work." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. I expected a dismissal, a gruff, "I know what I'm doing." Instead, he just said, "Show me." It was a command, but it was also a concession. A small white flag. My heart hammered against my ribs. I moved closer, the unique scent of him, soap and sweat and something clean, like rain on stone, filling my senses. "Here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Stand up straight. Relax your traps." I reached out, my hand hovering for a second before I made contact. I gently pressed on his shoulder blade. "Keep this down." My fingers splayed across the warm, solid muscle of his back. Under the thin cotton of his shirt, I could feel the intricate mechanics of him. It was like touching a live current. He didn't pull away. He stood perfectly still, letting me guide him. "Now," I said, my throat suddenly dry, "just let your arm go limp. Let the band pull it." He exhaled slowly and did as I said. His body relaxed under my hand. He let his arms stretch across his chest, his eyes closing for a moment. A low sound, almost a groan, escaped his lips. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of relief. "Yeah," he breathed out. "Okay, that's it." I kept my hand there for a second too long, a stupid, indulgent moment where I allowed myself to just feel the solid warmth of him under my palm. Then I pulled away, the loss of contact leaving my skin feeling cold. He did the stretch again, correctly this time. When he finished, he turned to me. For the first time, there was no wall in his eyes, just a direct, appraising look. "You learned that from books?" he asked. There was no sarcasm in it. It was a genuine question. "Physical therapy," I admitted. "Sprained wrist." He nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines. "The sensible one," he said, echoing Liam's words. But the way he said it now, it didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like a compliment. It sounded like respect. The ground had shifted beneath my feet. I was no longer just the useless shadow. I was helpful. I was, for a fleeting moment, the one in charge. And it changed everything. The storm broke the following Thursday. It had been threatening all day, the sky a bruised purple-gray. By the time we got to the gym, the air was thick and heavy, charged with ozone. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the glass walls as Marcus started his warm-up. We fell into our new rhythm. It was easier now. The silence between us was less heavy, more comfortable. I would offer a small correction on his form. He would actually listen. The power dynamic had found a new, more level ground. He was halfway through a set on the pec deck machine when the world flickered. The overhead lights buzzed, dimmed, and then died completely. We were plunged into a shocking, absolute darkness. A woman gasped somewhere across the gym. Then, with a hum, the emergency lights kicked on. They were weak, casting long, monstrous shadows that turned the familiar landscape of the gym into something alien and strange. The rhythmic thumping of the treadmill motors, the piped-in pop music, the clang of weights, all gone. All that was left was the sudden, roaring sound of the rain, which was now hammering against the roof and windows. A few other people, unnerved by the outage, gathered their things and left, their phone flashlights bobbing in the gloom. Soon it was just us, alone in the vast, shadowed weight room. The air was cool and smelled of rain and dust. Marcus was still sitting at the machine, his hands resting on his knees. He looked out the huge window at the sheets of water lashing the parking lot. "Looks like we're here for a while," he said. His voice was low, calm. I stood near the squat rack, my arms crossed over my chest. The usual anxiety I felt in this place was gone, replaced by a strange sense of peace. The storm had insulated us, cut us off from the rest of the world. It was just the two of us in our own private, dimly lit bubble. "Liam worries too much," he said suddenly, breaking the long silence. It wasn't addressed to me, really. He was still looking out the window. "He just cares about you," I replied, my voice sounding loud in the quiet. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "He cares." Yeah. He finally turned from the window, his face half in shadow. "It's good you're here, though. Not just for this." He gestured vaguely toward his shoulder. My heart did a slow, painful thump. "It's quiet," he said, the words seeming to cost him something. "At the house. Since Martha died, it's just big. Empty. Liam's always out with his friends. It's just quiet." It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say. He was speaking of his late wife. He was speaking of loneliness. He was cracking open the door to his own fortress, just a little. And something inside me compelled me to meet him there. "I know what you mean," I said softly. "My apartment is quiet too. Most of the time I like it. Or I tell myself I do. But sometimes the silence is so loud it's all I can hear." The confession hung in the air between us. It wasn't about attraction, not yet. It was about a shared state of being. Two men, living solitary lives, admitting it to each other for the first time. We were two lonely islands, and for a moment, we could see each other across the water. He stood up from the machine and walked slowly toward me. He stopped just a few feet away. The emergency light cast a pale glow on one side of his face, leaving the other in deep shadow. He looked at me, really looked at me, with an intensity that made the air feel thin. It felt like he was seeing past the sensible, quiet friend of his son. He was seeing me. "You're a good kid, Leo," he said, his voice rough. And then he took the last step that separated us. The space between us vanished. He was so close I could feel the heat coming off his body. He smelled like rain. His hand came up. I flinched, expecting him to pat my shoulder, a classic dismissive gesture between men. But his hand didn't go to my shoulder. It came to my face. His fingers were rough, callous for a lifetime of work, but his touch was incredibly gentle as he cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked slowly over my cheekbone. The sensation was electric. 1,000 tiny explosions under my skin. My entire body went rigid. I couldn't breathe. My stomach was full of bees, a frantic, buzzing swarm. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. My name. It wasn't a statement. It was a question. It was a plea. It was permission. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared into his shadowed eyes, my own answer playing on my face. My terror. My longing. He leaned in, his eyes never leaving mine. The movement was agonizingly slow, hesitant, giving me every possible chance to pull away, to stop it. I was frozen, a statue of want and fear. And then his lips touched mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss like in the movies. It was soft, questioning. It was chapped lips against mine, the faint taste of salt and rain. It was a discovery. His other hand came up to my other cheek, holding my face as if it were something precious, something fragile. My own hands, of their own accord, found their way to his waist, my fingers gripping the worn cotton of his t-shirt. He was so solid, a rock, an anchor in the swirling storm inside me. I kissed him back. I let the fear and the longing and the years of silent admiration pour into that one simple act. It was the most honest thing I had ever done. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Just as the kiss deepened, just as I felt him relax into it, a loud hum filled the room. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, and then flooded the gym with their harsh, unforgiving brightness. The moment shattered. We sprang apart like startled teenagers. He took 2 quick steps back, his hands dropping to his sides. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his chest rising and falling rapidly. I stood there, my lips still tingling, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. The harsh light exposed everything. The awkwardness, the impossibility of what had just happened. "Power's back," he said, his voice strained, unfamiliar. "Yeah," I breathed. The silence that fell was worse than any before. It was a chasm filled with the wreckage of that one perfect, impossible moment. He grabbed his gym bag from a bench, slinging it over his good shoulder. He still wouldn't look at me. "I'll drive you home," he said. It wasn't a question. The drive was 5 miles of the loudest silence I have ever experienced. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The windshield wipers kept a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Swish, swoosh. A metronome counting down my panic. I stared out the passenger window, watching the slick, wet streets slide by. I could feel him beside me, a tense, radiating presence. What was he thinking? Oh God, what is he thinking? He regrets it. Of course, he regrets it. A momentary lapse. A weird, storm-induced madness. He's straight. He's Liam's dad. I'm a catastrophic, walking mistake. He pulled up to my apartment building. He put the truck in park, but kept his hands clenched on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "See you Thursday," he said, his voice flat. He was staring straight ahead at the rain-streaked windshield. My entire body went cold. Thursday. He was pretending it didn't happen. We were just going to go back to the gym, back to our routine, and act like that kiss, that world-altering moment, was nothing. A dream. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a jerky, pathetic motion. I fumbled with the door handle and practically fell out of the truck. I didn't look back as I scrambled for the safety of my building's entrance. I heard the truck pull away before I even had my keys in the lock. The second my apartment door clicked shut behind me, the anxiety I'd been holding at bay hit me like a physical blow. I leaned against the door, my legs shaking. My apartment, my sanctuary of quiet and order, felt alien. The kiss had followed me in. It was clinging to my skin, my clothes. I could still feel the rough texture of his hand on my jaw, the pressure of his lips on mine. I paced the small space of my living room, my mind a maelstrom of self-recrimination. How could I have let that happen? How could I have been so stupid? He was confused, lonely, vulnerable, and I had let him, or had I encouraged him? I couldn't remember. The memory was already warping, twisting under the weight of my fear. He was going to hate me. He was going to tell Liam. Liam would hate me. I would lose my only friend. I would lose everything. My carefully constructed, safe little world was going to be demolished, and it was all my fault. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my heart a frantic, trapped bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Every creak of the building was him, coming back to tell me what a mistake it was. Every car that passed was him, driving by, filled with regret and disgust. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and restless, filled with dreams of shadows and rain and the taste of salt on my lips. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I tried to work, but the design elements on my screen swam before my eyes, meaningless shapes and colors. My focus was shattered. All I could do was check my phone. Every notification made my stomach plummet. A spam email, a news alert, a message from my mother. Nothing from him. The silence was a living thing. It grew and expanded until it filled every corner of my apartment. My former solitude, once a comfort, was now tainted. It was no longer a peaceful quiet. It was an absence. The booming, echoing absence of Marcus. On Wednesday afternoon, the day before our next scheduled session, my phone buzzed on the table. My heart leaped into my throat. It was him. A text message. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock the phone. I held my breath and read the words. Shoulders sore. Taking a few days off. Don't worry about tomorrow. That was it. clinical, distant, cold. A wave of something like relief washed over me, immediately followed by a crushing, gut-wrenching disappointment. It was a confirmation of my worst fears. He was pulling away. He was creating distance. This sore shoulder was a lie, a flimsy excuse to avoid seeing me. The kiss was a mistake, and this was his way of erasing it. I typed and deleted a dozen replies. Okay, hope you feel better. Too casual. Is everything all right? Too needy. We should talk. Too confrontational. In the end, I just sent back a single word. Okay. I threw my phone onto the couch as if it were contaminated. I had my answer. It was over before it ever began. It was a fluke, a moment of madness in a storm. Now things would go back to normal. Except they couldn't. I couldn't go back. The memory of his touch was branded on my skin. The silence in my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of rejection. The next 3 days were a blur of anxious waiting and grim acceptance. I tried to fall back into my old routine, but it was like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. The safety was gone. The comfort was gone. I had tasted something else, something real and terrifying and alive, and now my old life felt like a ghost of itself. I had resigned myself to the new reality. He would eventually text again, suggesting the gym, and we would go, and we would never, ever speak of the kiss. We would pretend it was a dream. The thought was a cold, hard on my stomach. Then, on Saturday evening, there was a knock on my door. It was a solid, firm knock. Not the hesitant rap of a delivery person. My blood ran cold. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door on numb legs, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked through the peephole, and my breath caught in my throat. It was him, Marcus, standing in the hallway of my apartment building. He wasn't in gym clothes. He was wearing jeans and a dark Henley shirt that stretched across his shoulders. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't looking at my door, but at the floor, his hands shoved into his pockets. I stood there for a full minute, paralyzed. My mind screamed at me, "Don't open it. He's here to end it. He's here to tell you how disgusted he is." But my body moved, again, without my permission. I unlocked the deadbolt, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet of my apartment. I opened the door. He looked up, and his gray eyes met mine. They were filled with a world of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Regret, fear, and something else. Something that looked an awful lot like desperation. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. I just nodded, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into my small living room and stood in the center, looking lost. He dwarfed the space, his presence a sudden, overwhelming force. He looked at my drafting table, at the neat stacks of books, at the framed prints on the wall. He was seeing my world, my fortress from the inside. I closed the door, the click echoing the finality of the moment. There was no escape now. The confrontation I had been dreading was here. The tension was a physical thing, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. He turned to face me, his hands still in his pockets. "I'm not good at this, Leo," he began, his voice rough. "This talking stuff," I waited, my entire body coiled like a spring. "I panicked," he said, the admission stark and raw. "After in the gym, and in the truck. I just panicked." He finally looked at me, his gaze direct and unflinching. "I am sorry. For the text. For being a coward." The word coward coming from this man, this mountain, was so unexpected it left me speechless. "I've spent the last 3 days trying to make it make sense," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "Trying to convince myself it was a mistake. A fluke. The storm, being alone, the quiet. I had 100 excuses." He took a step closer. None of them worked. Because it wasn't a mistake, my heart stopped. It just stopped beating for a second. "I thought I was just lonely," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Martha's been gone a long time. The house is God. The house is quiet. I thought that's all it was. A need for noise. For another person in the room." He shook his head slowly. "But it wasn't. It was you." He said the word "you" like it was a revelation. Like it was a word he had just learned. "Watching you in the gym. You're so careful. So observant. And then when you showed me that stretch, I don't know. Something shifted. And then in the storm," he trailed off, unable to articulate it. He didn't have to. I knew. I haven't felt anything like that, ever, he admitted, his voice thick with a vulnerability that undid me completely. And it scared the hell out of me. It still does. What it means. For me. For you. For Liam. The knot of fear in my chest finally began to loosen, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning hope. He was scared too. He was just as lost as I was. I thought you regretted it. I confessed, my own voice barely a whisper. I thought you were disgusted. That you were just going to pretend it never happened. A look of genuine pain crossed his face. No. God, no, Leo. It's the only thing I've been able to think about. We stood there in the middle of my living room, the space between us charged with all our unspoken fears, now finally spoken. We had laid our terror out on the table, and in the bright light of confession, it began to shrink. It was still there, a shadowy beast in the corner, but it no longer had its claws in us. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He reached out, not for my jaw this time, but just took my hand. His fingers wrapped around mine, his calloused palm warm and solid and real. I don't want to go back to the quiet house, he said, his voice low and steady. Not tonight. It wasn't a proposition. It wasn't a request for sex or for anything more than what he said. It was a request for presence. An admission that the solitude he had lived in for so long was no longer bearable. It was the most profound act of commitment he could have offered. It was a promise. A promise not to run away again. A promise to stay. Okay, I said, my hand gripping his tightly. Stay. He didn't leave that night. He slept on my couch, refusing my offer of the bed. I lay awake for hours, not with anxiety, but with a strange, humming awareness of his presence in the next room. The sound of his breathing, slow and steady in the darkness, was the most comforting sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my quiet apartment no longer being empty. The conversation with Liam was the next great hurdle. It happened a few weeks later, after he got back from Seattle. Marcus insisted we tell him together. He insisted on being the one to speak first. We sat in Marcus's large, quiet kitchen, the same kitchen where I had only ever been an awkward guest. Liam looked between us, his brow furrowed with confusion, then dawning understanding, then shock. Marcus was direct. He didn't use euphemisms. He told his son that he and I were together, that it was new and confusing, but that it was real. He told him he cared for me. I watched Liam's face, bracing for the anger, the disgust, the accusations. I was ready to lose him. But after a long, heart-stopping silence, Liam just looked at his dad. And then he looked at me. And he laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated shock. You, he said to me, shaking his head in disbelief. Him, he said to his dad. I asked you to spot him at the gym, and you end up, what? Dating. He scrubbed a hand over his face. Of all the things I was worried about, this was not on the list. He was quiet for another minute. Then he looked at his dad, and his expression softened. Are you happy? He asked, the question simple and direct. Marcus looked at me, a quick, brief glance, and then looked back at his son. Yeah, he said, his voice firm. Yeah, I am, and that was it. It wasn't easy. There were more conversations. Awkward moments. But the foundation was acceptance. Liam saw his father, not as a monument, but as a man who had been lonely for a very long time. And he saw me, his friend, as the person who had somehow, miraculously, changed that. A new routine began to form, a routine that involved two people. It was Marcus making coffee in my small kitchen in the morning. His large frame seemed to take up all the space, but it didn't feel cramped. It felt safe. He'd hand me a mug, his fingers brushing mine, and the simple touch held no anxiety anymore. Just a quiet, comfortable warmth. It was me, at his house, sketching at the huge oak dining table while he read the newspaper. The comfortable silence between us filled not with tension, but with shared peace. His quiet was no longer empty. My solitude was no longer lonely. It was nights spent in the same bed. My bed, which had always felt too big for one person, now felt exactly right. The first few times, I lay awake, rigid with a kind of joyful terror. But he would just reach for my hand in the darkness, his breathing a steady anchor, and I would eventually drift off, feeling safer than I ever had in my life. We learn each other in small, domestic moments. I learned that he hummed a low, tuneless rumble when he was fixing something. He learned that I couldn't sleep if there were dishes in the sink. I learned the story behind the scar over his eyebrow, a falling 2x4. He learned about my failed attempt to become a painter before I settled on graphic design. We were two different languages, slowly, patiently learning to translate each other. Sometimes I look back at the man I was before that phone call from Liam. The man who lived in his fortress of solitude, who curated his life like a museum exhibit, pristine, ordered, and utterly untouched. I built walls to keep the world out, to keep myself safe from the messiness of emotion, of connection. I thought that was strength. Marcus wasn't just a man I fell for. He was a force of nature. He was the thunderstorm that finally broke the long drought of my life. He didn't just knock on the door of my fortress. He walked right through the walls, tracked sawdust on my clean floors, and rearranged all the furniture. He disrupted everything. And in the beautiful, chaotic rubble of my old life, we built something new, something real, something shared. My quiet life isn't gone. It's just harmonized now, my silence a comfortable counterpoint to his steady presence. The love I found wasn't something I was looking for. It was a plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that ultimately led me to a truer, braver version of myself.